Thank you very much. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate to see all the friendly faces. So yeah, my name is David Cohn. Currently, I run something called Subtext, which is like a platform that lets journalists and news organizations text with their audience. So we work with organizations around the world, and it's a fun way to engage the audience. But what I'm really honored to be a part of here is the conversation, Reimagining Journalism, New Models for the Audience. What I hope we can take from this is like a sense of enthusiasm and optimism, because I know it is a very tough time in journalism, as a lot of the panels and discussions have been, as they should be. I don't want to put anything under the rug. There's a lot of difficult issues, but there's also a lot of optimism, and it can be an exciting time, right? I hearken back to the conversation yesterday with Richard Gingras, talking about the difficulty of going between the fact that the internet has allowed so much potential, so much conversation, but there is a downside to that too, right? So not to say that we're going to ignore the downside, but I want us to take the time now to appreciate the positives, what's new, what's different. And to help us do that, I have some amazing speakers here. I'm not going to give a full introduction. I'm just going to say their names one more time. I'm going to let them kind of speak for themselves. I apologize if I butcher any of these, but Barkha Dutt, founder and editor of Mojo India. Jazmi Acun, co-founder and editorial director of El Surtidor in Paraguay. Padma Priya, editor-in-chief and co-founder of Suno. Devi Asmarani, editor-in-chief of Magdalene.co. And Chani Guyot, founder and director of ACCIÓN. So first of all, thank you all for coming. It's an honor and a pleasure to have all of you. And so I'm just going to hand the mic over. Barkha going to share her story.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, David. You almost got my name right. So full points for trying. It's lovely to be here with some of the world's best journalists, particularly special for me because this is the building in which I earned my journalism degree, so it literally is a back-to-school moment. We're here to talk about reimagining journalism in a very difficult time. So I think before I start a little bit of my presentation, just a little bit of background on me. I was a television journalist for more than 20 years in India. A host, a presenter, and a reporter with one of the premier networks, New Delhi Television. And at some point when I began to feel that freedom was shrinking in television, and that I needed to do my own piece, and freedom was shrinking for a variety of reasons, even Maria Ressa referenced some of them, but also the space to report, to go out and give voice to people was shrinking. So there were two kinds of diminishing aspects to Indian television. I'm a child of television. I'm a first-generation TV journalist. Indian TV news only became privatized in 1995. So we're that nascent an industry. But 20 years later, I found that what had drawn me to television was dying. I'm a visual storyteller, and I continue to be one, so I knew whatever I did next had to be video first. And so I set out to find my mojo, and hence my platform is called Mojo, rediscover the mojo, the magic of journalism, and to remind ourselves why we became journalists to begin with. And I launched my platform literally like a startup out of my basement, where 5 people, and 3 months later the pandemic hits. I'm literally like this baby outfit, and COVID hits. And what I'm going to share with you over the next some minutes, as long as I have time on the stage, and then we can pick up what's incomplete in the Q&A, is how one of the most difficult moments in the world became an odd opportunity for journalism if you had the will, the passion, the courage, the curiosity, and were willing to innovate with technology. This is what was born at the end of my 2 years on the road. I spent 2 years of 2020 and 21 on the road, literally living with the pandemic. And to give you context, like all other countries in the world, India announced a lockdown. Our lockdown in 2020 was one of the most stringent, I would say, in the world. One of the things we did differently from other parts of the world is we closed public transport. So this is very important to understand both what happens to the people of India and what happens to my journalism. There were no aeroplanes, no buses, no trains, and there was a curfew, which means anyone stepping out was in violation. The media was exempt, but regular people couldn't go out. You weren't allowed to go out. And this is how my journey on the road started. What happened was that India witnessed the largest mass exodus, mass movement of people since the partition of the country. Daily wage workers who suddenly found that economic activity had come to a grinding halt suddenly had no income, and like the rest of us, wanted to be with those who they loved back in the villages, just in case this was the end of the world. And let us remind ourselves that in the beginning of 2020, when we did not even know that COVID was airborne, it did feel like the end of the world. So on the highways, the expressways of India, these were the images you saw. You saw the poorest citizen of India packing all of their little belongings into a sack that was virtually the universe that they carried on their heads along with their toddler children. Walking like this, not 100, not 200, not 300, but sometimes up to 1,000 kilometers on foot from the cities to the villages. What I found, to my astonishment, as I walked with them, was that my erstwhile medium, big media, television, was missing. Television had decided to hunker down in studios. Television, in India at least, had decided to remain talk TV, studio TV, talking heads driven. And there were very, very, very few people out there telling the story from the ground, telling the story of the people. There were a handful of people like myself, and there were some print reporters of our language press, our language newspapers, and there were local correspondents. We depended a lot on the hyper-local inputs from across the country. And you can see there were little children like this. They often had no food, no water. They were lucky if they had a packet of biscuits. It was hot in India. It was still April and May. And this became my life. It literally became my life, following millions of people on the road, even as there was a complete invisibilization of them in big media. Their story wasn't told. The government at one point went and told the Supreme Court that there are no migrants on the road. And I just kept producing my stories. In fact, some of them went into the petitions that were filed by civil society groups to try and get justice and some sort of solace for these people. As I said, many of them were walking barefoot and had blisters on their feet. And this became my life. And at one point, I was confronted in a way that I'd never been confronted. I had never had to face, I knew it, but I never lived it. The structural class inequity of my country. And I realized that my journalism, I have been a war correspondent. I have covered insurgencies. I've spent a long time reporting in Kashmir. I've reported from Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan. That's my background. And been a political journalist. And I would kind of think of the social issues as the features, as the soft stuff. Hey, I don't do that. I'm a tough nut. I go to war. And in that process, somewhere I found that I had lost a connect with my audience, a connect that I was able to rebuild as a five-member team. I spent 125 days on the road. I traveled 30,000 kilometers by car from Delhi to Kerala in the south, and then back to the north. And that was the edifice on which Mojo was built. That was the edifice in which I think, a lot of people ask me, is this Barkha 2.0? And I said, no, it's Barkha 1.0. I just forgotten who I was and why I became a journalist. And these images you see, this was astonishing to me. We found factory workers who were wanting to go home actually locked up like enslaved creatures by the owners of their factories behind these locks. And they had designated times at which they could be let out for a cup of tea by the people who owned these factories, and they actually thought they were being kind and they were being good. And when we walked in, we found them stranded, upset, no roof over their heads, living out in the open, in the scorching sun. And when we were filming this, the security guards of this factory came and beat us up, took our tapes. Of course, we raised hell. There was still our relative privilege that we could put to use. We tweeted the chief minister of Delhi and so on, and we got out. This family, you see, something very peculiar happened in India. The police was a frontline responder, and often they suffered because they had no exemption, they had no option to stay home. But they were weaponized by the state against the poorest people. And instead of the lockdown being something to protect people, it became a state-imposed curfew. So when some people, like her name was Seema, when she tried to go home, she kept getting beaten by the cops at the barricade and sent back. And they had no water, so there was a pipe in a public park, and they stopped to have water, and then she just collapsed in tears. And there was supposed to be social distancing, but I lost track of the number of people. That classic divide we're taught about the distance between yourself and the subject you're reporting, it evaporated for me in COVID. And Seema collapsed in my arms. We don't have a lot of time. I would love to tell you a lot about these people, but this story, I just want to speak a little bit about it. When work, economic activity came to a halt, the poor had no assets. So how are they going to eat? The one asset that the poor do have in India are smartphones, mobile phones. So the poor started selling their phones. So this lady's name is Poonam. She was married to a man called Mukesh. And Mukesh used to work on construction sites as a painter. When the lockdown happened, Mukesh had no income. So Mukesh sold his phone, and Mukesh brought home some wheat, some rice, and a table fan. I remind all of you that this is a very hot country I come from, and it was really unbearably hot. And this couple with their children lived in a slum tenement, and he got a table fan home. His wife was really happy. She said, oh, maybe we'll get by through the next week. But Mukesh was so despairing of what he would do next that after he gave his wife these grains and this fan, he took her sari. The sari is the traditional Indian clothing that she's wearing, and he tied it to a bamboo pole, one of the poles of their hut, and he took his own life. And she was left holding a photograph when we arrived at their home the next day, and that is their family. And this became my life. This became the life of Mojo. Poor, desperate people begging trucks that were allowed to ply because they had to carry essential supplies to give them a lift. And it could be the night time, it could be forests, it could be children. And then one day at the back of a truck, it was almost like a scene from, like children or people being trafficked. I climbed onto a truck, just to give you a sense. I saw a truck like this, I climbed onto it, and this is what I saw inside. People just packed like sardines, desperate. They had paid touts to try and get home. And I'm sharing all of this with you because so many things happened at the same time. There was the medical crisis, there was the humanitarian crisis, and then there was the media crisis, because big media was not telling these stories. These stories were not being told. And these workers, this child was 9 years old, and I asked him playfully, do you know what coronavirus is? And he said to me in Hindi, yes, I know, mujhe malum hai. I said, what does it mean? He said, coronavirus means I don't get food. That was his understanding, because that is what it had meant for him. And, there's so much to talk about. There's this girl, she was 15. She took her father, who just had an operation. She cycled 1,200 kilometers home, taking her father to her village in Bihar, got Ivanka Trump's attention, who did a really tone-deaf tweet on her, presenting her as a sporting champion as opposed to being a victim of trauma. She was 15 and she'd had to cycle home. I had the chance to go and meet Jyoti a year later, and she said, you must come for a cycle ride with me. And so that was one of our lighter moments in this moment of despair. There were little babies who couldn't get attention. They were suffering from other terminal illnesses, but our hospitals were completely consumed with the pandemic. And this is her, the child's father. And well, it carries on like this. This is a cancer patient who was walking from hospital to hospital to get treatment. These were 4 girls whose father died from tuberculosis. Again, could get no access to the health system because the hospitals were consumed by the pandemic. This was a man beaten by the cops because he stepped out to a wholesale market to buy vegetables because he had no money to buy vegetables from the retail stores. He was beaten by the cops and, as happens in poetic moments in journalism, dropped right next to a police barricade by the cops themselves and left to fend for himself. These were workers who were trying to make it back home. They came under a truck. Their bodies were heaped into plastic packets as if they were not even animals sent back home on ice slabs. These were workers walking back home, and they decided to spend the night on railway tracks because no trains were plying their thought. And at 4 in the morning, a freight train ran them over. And all that was left of them was this piece of bread that they had packed. They were lucky enough to have some food. And this image sort of said everything to me about them. How much time do I have? A couple of minutes? 1 minute? Okay. There's a lot in this presentation, and I'm happy to just sort of post it in a common space for anyone to access. Here's what I want to say. I want to say that for me, it was a moment to discover 2 things. 1 hour away from Delhi was a village. I live in Delhi, 1 hour away. Just 1 hour away from India's capital was a village where, as the government was urging people, please wash your hands. Nobody knew what to do, so people kept saying, please wash your hands, keep washing your hands. I went to this village and I found that there was no potable drinking water. So these poor workers who already had no money had to buy their water. And then I asked them about washing their hands. So they took me to the tap and they showed me that the water that came to their village was yellow. And basically, there were factories all around that had contaminated the ground soil, and so the water was yellow, and even if they washed their hands, their skin would break into these eruptions, so they had to buy water just to wash their hands. I wrote a book about my journey called The Humans of Covet, and it begins with the village with the yellow water, and it's a mea culpa moment for me as a journalist. I say that I did not know that this village existed, and it was an hour from where I lived. I say that in television, I had lost touch with my audience. And I say that with 5 people, we started Mojo's story. We were video first. We had no investors. We were just plunged into the deep end of this because COVID happened. We didn't even have time to build a company. We were on the road. But because of the strength of our reporting and taking news back to the people, going to where the story is and placing people first, which is officially our motto. We are today at 830,000 subscribers, within a million mark this year. And so I believe that all this bullshit that we're told that the audience doesn't care about authentic classic journalism is wrong. We are the ones who've lost touch. We are the ones who need to get our mojo back. Thank you.
Oh, Barkha, go. Stay for 1 second.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you as well, because I was going to make the joke of, didn't I tell you this was going to be the positive one? Because a lot of those stories were obviously very tough. But
the end result was positive.
And that's what I want to ask you a question about, because there's also this old phrase that everything old is new again.
Yeah.
Which I guess what I wanted to ask you is it's, we always know that boots on the ground reporting helps our journalism. But to me, it also sounds like it's helped you in your relationship to the audience. And I wonder if you can speak to that, and also if it has changed the way that the audience relates to you.
Yes.
Do you get a sense of that?
It's a great question. And I will say that I think it's the oldest instruments of journalism pounding the pavement with the newest innovations of technology. We were a very, very lean crew. I came from television where you had satellite vans and you had field producers and you had, editors and you had all of that. And we still had an editor back home, but we were a team of 4, including my driver. Right? And we were shooting, we had regular broadcast cameras, but we were shooting on professionally configured, high-resolution smartphone units. And we were using dongles to send our footage. And we were streaming live from some of the remotest corners of my country. And yes, I think that people who had felt a certain amount of ennui with me, I don't know if they would identify it as honoring, but what was I doing? I'd become a studio rat as well. I love to be a reporter, but over the years, television's revenue model's broken. Nobody putting money to send people out into the field to report. And here I was back as the young reporter that they remembered. It was like rebuilding a broken relationship. Getting some new audience, but also rebuilding a broken relationship. And I think with just one other answer, and then I'll shut up. In 2021, India had elections while schools were closed. And I was outraged that we had elections, we had polling booths open when schools were closed. And I'm a political news junkie. I remember being a J school student and crying in the 6th floor lab because while I was studying here, I'd missed an election back home. But going back to this kind of journalism and connecting with people directly, on principle, I refused to cover the elections because I thought that it was so egregious that the elections were being held at all. And so I changed, my journalism changed, my relationship with my audience changed, and I would say it deepened.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In technology, sometimes we say that constraints are good, and obviously, you know, it sounds like you made the best of the constraints of COVID. Next, Jazmi, who will tell us about the sort of visual innovations.
Hello, everyone. A real pleasure to be here to talk about the work that we do at El Surti. I just want to say one thing. 11 years ago, I applied to J School at Columbia. I got in, but I couldn't pay. So I'm really happy to be here now. I wanted to share that with you, yeah. And a real pleasure again to talk here about the work that we do at El Surti. El Surti is a digital news outlet from Paraguay, a landlocked country right in the center of South America. For 6 years now, we have published and specialized in visual journalism to try to speak directly to new, younger audiences. We think of visual journalism as the combination of quality reporting with striking, very powerful images that we use from pop culture, the entertainment industry, and even memes. We pack all of this, text and images, on JPEG files that they are very easy to read and very easy to share on social media. This was our first JPEG file, the first one that we published 6 years ago on Facebook. At the time that we launched El Surti, 6 years ago, not more than 4 powerful economic groups were the owners of most media outlets. Media capture is a concept that summarizes pretty well the state of press freedom in Paraguay 6 years ago. That hasn't changed much, and it's an issue that happens all over Latin America as well. And also media organizations didn't deliver news keeping in mind young people. You could see that in their choices of formats, languages, coverage. And Paraguay has a very young population, which is a crucial opportunity for social change that we felt was missing. At the same time, we saw an opportunity in the growth of small digital newsrooms in Latin America, such as Carlos Dada's El Faro from El Salvador. These new media really inspire us and show us a way to overcome the issue of media capture and try to speak directly to new, younger audiences. Some of the work that we have done, you can see here. But we had a challenge, of course, their attention. Why would young people read us? Why would they care to read us? So our answer to that was visual journalism. Quality reporting combined with striking, powerful images that can attract their attention. Then we had another challenge, poor internet access. Back then, the cost of mobile data and low bandwidth put a limit on access. Although this has improved over the years, most Paraguayans still access the internet with their mobile phones, and also most only navigate social media platforms because it's cheaper. So what we have done is we have adapted all of our content to mobile and social media. And we have chosen a format that's less data heavy to publish, the JPEG file. Since then, we have grown to assemble a team, an amazing team of reporters, designers, illustrators that have one purpose: to inform new audiences in Paraguay that traditional media haven't paid that much attention to. We're not after breaking news. We do original stories about topics that affect their lives, their present, their futures, like the climate crisis and gender inequality. We really try to make sure that we break down these very complex issues for them so that they're easy to read, that they're easy to understand, and that they're easy to share where they communicate, social media platforms and messenger apps. We have learned a lot trying to engage with young audiences like ourselves, like the founders. I'll tell you one story of failure. Our audience at some point, they wanted to understand more complex issues. Our JPEG files had a space limit, obviously. And at the same time, Facebook started asking everyone to pivot to video. That was back in 2016-17. And it just seemed natural to us to get on board. But videos really didn't work for us. The reach and the engagement didn't meet the effort that we were putting into making them. And likely internet connection was still so bad that videos took forever to upload. And also they demanded more data than our usual JPEG files. So yeah, naturally people prefer to save their data and watch entertainment videos rather than watching our depressing stories. Yeah. So in our search for a format that would allow us to tell larger stories, we came up with scrollytelling. Scrollytelling is a format that allows the user to navigate text and images at their own rhythm with the up and down movement of the thumb that we all know and do on social media. And it doesn't use a lot of data. The scrollytelling gave us our first innovation award, the Gabo Award. But the most important thing is that we managed to bring attention to the fact that Paraguay has one of the most accelerated rates of deforestation in the world. There is an ecocide happening right now in Paraguay. So that was the best thing that we got out of this story. What we learned from this story is to adopt the principle form follows function in our newsroom. Who is going to read the story? Who do I want to tell this story to? And how does that person access information? Those are the questions that we believe we forgot to ask first before jumping into the video wagon. And another thing that we have learned all these years is that serious topics can be covered with pop references from comics, movies, and even memes. I'll give you an example. Every year, the president of Paraguay has to inform Congress and the population in general of what he has done in office, just like the US state of the Union. And every year is quite boring. It's quite uneventful, even for us reporters. So you might wonder, you probably guess how young audiences care about it. So our purpose has been to get young people engaged. So we decided to fact check the president's speech with memes. And in general, we have used memes in our reporting to try to establish a deeper connection with our readers. We make an effort to publish in a contemporary language that they can relate to, that they can engage with. Memes have allowed El Surti to attract young people's attention and also to inform this audience about important news topics that normally they wouldn't care about, such as the annual speech of the president of Paraguay. Just some examples of the work we did in the past years, fact-checking our president with memes. We had a lot of fun. I think that's key. We had a lot of fun doing this too. Some of the reporting that we have done about the climate crisis, using also memes. And last, and I think I'm gonna leave it on there, we also think that we should be more like memes. And you might be wondering how. Memes as a framework for journalism, maybe? We propose that memes have qualities that journalists can emulate to get closer to new audiences. And what are those qualities? Adaptability, to reach more audiences and to be more sustainable. Our stories should be adaptable to different platforms like memes, so more people can read them. It's key for us that all of our pieces can adjust easily to our website as well as social media platforms and messenger apps. Then also, we have to be agile to be relevant. Memes and news move fast, you know that. We should be able to identify quickly how we can contribute with our coverage and test all of our ideas with our audiences in a reasonable time frame to stay relevant. We should just leave out what doesn't work and stop doing it. Our production has to adapt and respond to a changing environment. That's where we work. And we have to be more community-driven. Memes only make sense to communicate with others. Journalism as well. A way that we have found to counter growing media distrust is by opening up our newsrooms to our audience members, by allowing audience members to participate in the newsmaking process, to see how we do the news, and by trying to listen attentively to their needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's up to you. You consider. That was fantastic. I loved a lot of things there. I hope it's all right I ask you this. You kind of had a pivot to video moment there, which in the U.S. we had a pivot to video as well that didn't work out. But it was from that you got, I think you called it scrolly telling. And that going from something that isn't working to then discovering something that is, that's an interesting process. I wonder if you could just elaborate for just 30 seconds more on what that, because that's a roller coaster of emotions too, right? Because on that picture when you won that award, you guys looked like you won it. What was that experience like? How did you recognize something isn't working and then come to the thing that was?
Yeah. Our JPEG files just had more reach than our videos. That's what we noticed. And also, we couldn't really trust in the numbers that Facebook were giving us. So we said, okay, we're putting so many resources into these videos. And we thought that a lot of people, 3 more times people would read them or watch them, and that wasn't happening. So we started asking, how can we combine text and visuals and give reporters and designers and illustrators more space to tell more complex issues, to improve our storytelling. And we just look at what people do on social media platforms. At the time, it was the up and down movement. Now you go also like this on Instagram, so that has changed from them. And we didn't think it would work, and then it did. We had an amazing web programmer, so that really helped us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the visuals. Everything looked amazing. If anybody is curious, there's a great book called Understanding Comics. If you don't take comics seriously, read the book Understanding Comics. It's in comic form, and you will have a new appreciation for the art form.
Okay, I'll read it.
I'll
read it too.
It's a very interesting book. Padma, please.
Hello everyone, I'm so honored and glad to be here. Thank you IPI for this opportunity. I'm Devi Padma Priya. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Suno India. Suno India basically means Listen India, and it's a podcast platform that provides well-researched multilingual audio content on issues that we think really matter. So very early on, we started in 2018 September on the World Podcasting Day, which is coming up on September 30th. And early on, we decided that we would not be a breaking news platform, but would instead be a slow news, audio-only platform where we will highlight critical issues. And we started shows, on a wide range of things, starting from child adoption to history to tuberculosis to people living with rare diseases and LGBT community, the climate change. And the reason we did this was honestly, and I think Barkha sort of gave you a glimpse of how it was to be in a TV newsroom. And for us as consumers of news, I also as a journalist, what I was feeling was TV news was they were just screaming all the time, and they were not really discussing issues. And at that point in time, me and my other two co-founders, we had switched, I had switched careers and I'd moved to the development sector because I had felt so disillusioned with journalism, and I actually wanted to do some meaningful work with my skill sets. And I was working with Doctors Without Borders for over 4 years, and here I was, seeing the scale of public health issues that we in India were being faced with. And my partner, Rakesh Kamal, who was in climate change, was seeing what was happening on ground with regards to climate change. And other co-founder, who is also the digital head, he comes from, from Rajasthan, and he knew what was happening in his state. And we figured, listen, what's going on? Like, why are these issues not being told? Why are these stories not being told? And that's how Suno India's, the idea for Suno India was born. In a country where news is sensationalism, and news is only breaking all the time, it's only breaking, there's nothing which is not breaking all the time, right? We decided we'll slow down, and we felt that was the logical next step. We felt, listen, if all the time people are being told something is breaking news, how are they even synthesizing this information? So we decided to be a tortoise and not a hare in this race, right? In the race. And as a platform, we believe that processing information slowly, helping consumers, your listeners, or whoever is your audience, helping them synthesize it thoroughly was really key to it. And you should only put it out when you have synthesized it yourself as a journalist first, and not, just go and spout whatever you want on television or wherever, right? So, and also that's a very good way to sort of also tackle disinformation. For me, I find it very amusing that we have fact-checking teams and fact-checking courses happening, because when I started off in journalism 15, 16 years ago, that was the norm. Fact-checking, what is fact-checking? Journalism meant, checking all the facts and then putting it out. And then now you have fact-checking courses. And I recently got trained to be a trainer for fact-checking. So, the irony of it is very amusing for me in many ways. So we consciously, as a platform, we consciously look for stories that need to be told. And we remain true to our mission and prioritize looking for these underreported stories and underrepresented communities and telling those stories. We've been told by people, oh my God, Padma, but why are you taking such really dark, deep stories, unsexy stories like tuberculosis? Who is going to listen to it? But hello, your country has the highest burden of tuberculosis. You should be knowing this. And surprisingly, we do have listeners. When we started out, and we still work very much like a bootstrap team. We are a 6-member team putting out podcasts. Every single day we put out podcasts on our different shows. And the reality is that as long as you put out good content, there are people who are good journalism. There will always be people who will come to you, who will listen to you, who will spread the word for you, and who will help you grow. So when we started out, we wanted to also carve a niche for ourselves in a digital media space like podcasts, which was just growing in India. In 2018, people were just hearing the word podcast, and now it's booming. So at Suno India, we are in the process of reimagining journalism in the form of reported narrative podcasts, and we remain to be among the few in India who are doing this, and we were the first to do this in India, and remain very few who continue to do reported narrative podcasts. And then, the question is, as a journalist, you can live in your own head, right? And you might be thinking you're telling an important story, but how do you know it's connecting to your audience? How do you know it's going to the larger audience? And is it making them take action? And we learned over time, over the 4 years, what we learned through engaging with our audience, through talking through them, through Twitter DMs, through different events where they meet us, through Instagram DMs, is that, what sets us apart right now is our also focus on accessibility of information. So let me explain that a bit. So we have come to believe that people don't need more breaking news. They need to come to terms to what is happening around them. They need to understand it better. And more importantly, I feel they don't need to be told what to think. And this is what's been happening with journalism in India. And I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the world where journalists are telling people, this is the right way. This is the only right way to think. You have to think this way. No. Put all the facts in front of your audience and let them make up their mind and make a choice about which way they want to go towards, right? And for us, I think this is the defining characteristic of our relationship with our audience. Let me give you a very brief example from our reporting during the pandemic. Audio made it very easy for us to get voice notes over WhatsApp. Like Barkha explained before, we were in a complete lockdown. We couldn't go out reporting. I obviously wasn't going to send out my very small team out reporting in a pandemic. We realized that, well, hello, everybody in India has WhatsApp, so let's use the voice note option to start doing stories. So we started producing podcasts where I would actually send questions to people over a voice note, and they would send in their messages. And I'm talking at a time also, I'm also talking from regions like Kashmir where, apart from the COVID pandemic, there was also an information shutdown happening. The data was not working really well there. They only had 2G data. And I was trying to understand what the situation for the doctors was like in Kashmir. And so I did an entire podcast where over voice notes, and we put them together into a podcast. Similarly, we wanted to do a podcast for our regional language Telugu news show about farmers in my state who were now stuck in their homes, unable to move out to harvest their crop because the lockdown happened at a time when it was time to harvest crops. And here were all these farmers unable to move out to harvest their crops and facing a disastrous, future. So I reached out to some farmers, and they sent me again over voice notes what was going on. And I had one farmer ask me over the phone, how many people will listen to this? I said, I hope at least 5,000 plus people will listen to it. And then he says, oh, that's a lot. Even if 10 people listen to my story and tell the government to help us, and even if, out of that 10, even 5 talk on our behalf, that's enough. And for me, that's the sort of power just audio you can do for you, right? And and one other story I want to share, there was a local family theater group which had been around for over 300 years now in Telangana, in the state I come from. And they had seen pretty much everything from the World War to India gaining independence, as a family theater group, they were getting passed on. And then the COVID hit them, and they were unable to survive because they were unable to go out and perform. And these are performers who go into villages and, perform on streets and in villages and in other local settings. And they had started putting out an appeal for food, because they were unable to access, they didn't have money. They were getting, they were reaching a point of bankruptcy. And I reached out to the person heading it, and we did a story on them. And it got picked up by the state government, and they immediately got help, And after that, a couple of private citizens got together, did like a donation drive for them, and also helped them move their, theater to the online, help them pivot to online, doing plays on YouTube, right? So, and the other thing that we did when I'm talking about synthesizing audio, if you all remember in early 2020 and 2021, we all were faced with an infodemic. And I think as even journalists, we were just overwhelmed with the kind of news that was hitting us every single day. We would get bulletins, state bulletins, central government bulletins, WHO bulletins to track. And we were just, as citizens, as journalists, we were getting overwhelmed. So we decided to go ahead and do these 2-minute audio bulletins, which we then started sharing. So what we did was, every day we would do like a news wrap-up of the most important information that was crucial for people. Okay, today today you can, the lockdown was lifted for a few hours. From Monday to Thursday, you can move around between these times. So things that were very relevant to the audience. And what we did was we started putting out these 2-minute audio bulletins, and that really helped people to just, they started sharing those 2-minute bulletins over WhatsApp, over Instagram, over Twitter, and we started getting newer listeners to our shows. And, that's when it sort of strikes you, right? at the core of it, journalism is all about staying rooted to the community, right? So how do you, this is the big question, right? For us, how do you set yourself apart in a crowded news space? And also in a very growing, right now we are competing in a growing Indian podcast market, which has, currently estimated to be close to 60 million listeners and is the third largest market after China and US. So how do we set apart in such a crowded news space? And how do you make a mark, in a space like podcasting which people are not aware of, but, and also how do you stay true to your vision and stay independent, right? So these were some of the questions that, I don't have, we continue to grapple with and we continue to sort of work towards. But I think for us, the environment that we work in, the media environment, it sort of pushed us to do a systematic and fundamental rethink of every aspect of our journalism. From the topics of choice we choose to the people we are associated with. So a lot of our podcasts are hosted by expert domains and not celebrities, which is the case with many podcasts in India. We knew that we had to work with the community and within the community to ensure that their voices are told. And this is where these stories are, right? So, and you have to build a community around these topics, around these stories. And, this is the continued motivation for us on which we decide which topics to cover and also in which languages we branch out into. I'll not take up too much time. 4 years into this journey, now when we are asked about our purpose and vision, I can say that we are building an ecosystem in audio journalism that serves the different needs of a very diverse community. We have seen that this strategy is reaping rewards in the way that we have gained listenership, the demographics of reach, and the increased time spent listening. We are currently averaging at 100,000 listens per month with no marketing because we don't have the money for marketing. With many listeners not only coming to us from the metro cities or the big cities, but also from smaller towns of India. We believe that changing the way news is consumed will also help us to rebuild the trust within the communities that we feel has been lost in the last decade or so. Another thing that we have realized is that for regional audience, they're very keen to know a lot about their own region, their own culture, in their own languages. And for me, I see this as a huge opportunity. I see them as, I see our podcast as oasis in these news deserts. And this is right now reflecting in the kind of success that we have had in our regional language podcast. Again, I'll give you an example. When we launched our Telugu news podcast, Telugu is spoken in the state that I am from, in the southern part of India. When we launched it, within 2 months, we had 50,000 listeners. Again, we didn't have to do much. We just had to put it out there. And people who were looking for podcasts in current affairs found our podcast, stumbled on it, and through word of mouth, we just garnered listeners. So, to sum up, in the last 4 years, after producing over 600 episodes in more than 25 different podcasts, which, covering a huge range of genres, and right now we have crossed over 5 million listeners, we've realized that good journalism will always have takers, right? So good journalism will always be well received by your audience, however niche it can be or however general it can be. But at the crux of it is nuanced and honest storytelling. We are now moving to the next level as a platform and looking at how we can engage more with our audience and how do we champion, and we want to champion journalistic and non-fiction podcasts. And for this, in fact, just 2 days ago, we launched our Android app, and hopefully we'll be launching our iPhone app. And we believe also in sharing resources, with the media ecosystem, because I believe that doing that is sort of key to our collective success and survival. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Like all of our presenters, I could ask you a bunch of questions, but yeah, please. And I do want to note that I hear a common theme so far of, I'll just say, sort of lost and found. There was something that has been lost, and what you all are working on is finding it in different ways. You mentioned the word community a lot.
Yeah.
And I think when a lot of people think of podcasting, they don't necessarily think of community because it's a very passive, lean back, just sort of let the audio wash over you. And we could talk about podcasting. Again, a lot of questions I could ask about that. But I want to focus on community. So outside of the podcast itself, what are the things that you have done to sort of, I'll say, water and grow the community? How does that blossom?
So I'll give you an example with our first podcast, which was called Dear Pari, and it's a podcast on child adoption in India. And it actually stemmed from a personal story of me and my partner who's sitting here, and our journey of adopting our daughter. And adoption is a very taboo topic in India, even today. And people will ask you very insane questions without any filters as to why you chose to adopt, if you're infertile, blah, blah, blah. And we also realized that people did not know where to go looking for certain answers. Like, how do you, talk to your family if you want to adopt? How do you do that? So, so we decided to start Dear Pari more from a storytelling which combines good journalism, right? So what we did was we did like a 360-degree deep dive. We put out a multi-episode series in which we brought in what is called as the adoption triad. You got in the birth parent, you bring in an adoptee, and you bring in the parent who has adopted. And also we had adoptive counselors, we had people from the community come and talk about their experience in adoption. And for us, that was like a huge learning moment, because we realized that not only were we catering to a community of, say, currently there are, I think, 30,000 parents waiting to adopt in India, but we were also catering to to their families, right? And we were sort of catering to this community, which is niche as it sounds, but again, their issues are not being addressed by any media because it's a non-issue. It's an unsexy subject. So we started looking for niches. We look for niches. We look for topics which otherwise are considered unsexy, and we reach out to communities and we tell them this is what we want to do, and do you want to tell your story? And oftentimes they will say yes, and then the community will take your podcast to the larger, to the extended community. So that's what I mean by community. I literally mean, when I say community, I mean it in the literal sense. Like, yeah.
Thank you. I love the approach. Devi, can you join us and tell us about Magdalene, right?
So I move this one. Okay, thank you. Hi everyone. It's really nice to be here, and honestly, I'm quite nervous going after these ladies. They're amazing, and what they're doing is amazing. And I think I see some similarities between what I'm doing and the reason, the background, and everything that we're doing. I think there's a red thread here that we can learn from why and how to fix journalism. So anyway, my name is Devi, and like many other founders of media startups, we started Magdalene, myself and my partner, because we wanted to find something that wasn't available at the time that we really wanted. We want to read, we want to consume. And I've been a journalist at the time for almost 2 decades, and I've fallen in and out of love with journalism, mostly because I felt that a lot of what I was doing wasn't really making impact. And so did a few other things, and then coming back to journalism. Of course, you can never take a journalist out of journalism. So we decided, my partner and I decided to create a media platform or a media outlet. And we were doing a lot of researches, and we found something that we thought we could work with, which is that the media, there was no media outlet or publication that really catered to women beyond the, your typical kind of fashion, beauty, and lifestyle thing. And, understandably, you don't go to women's publication to, read about politics or social issues. I mean, but why not, right? And the thing is, the conventional or the non-women focused media at the time wasn't actually, or still very masculine and even misogynist in some things. And I think some Indonesian journalists can agree with this. And which is just a reflection of our really deeply patriarchal society. So we thought this is where we start, is we are aiming to create, a publication that is focused on women, that has a decidedly gender perspective, of intersectional feminist perspective. And so we started, and it was in English at the time, because our background is mostly writing for English publication. But over the years, after a couple of years, we realized that we had a lot more reach if we write in Indonesian. So now we are bilingual, and with maybe about 80% in Indonesian and the rest in English. But so that was the seed of what will become Magdalene in 2013. Our mission then was to represent a wider spectrum of womanhood, which wasn't really, you couldn't really find in the media at the time, through stories that are not really being covered. To do critical coverage on existing, issues and existing harmful norms or traditions. Sorry, this is kept moving. Can you, or maybe did I do something with that? Okay. It's not on play, right? Okay, good, thank you. And the other thing that we wanted to do was to, promote the inclusive values and also to celebrate diversity, which is, including normalizing underrepresented groups or communities, such as the LGBTIQ people, who are still very much stigmatized and, facing a lot of discrimination in Indonesia's increasingly conservative landscape. And so Magdalene quickly became a hit among women, particularly educated, urban, and middle-class women. And because we were publishing in English at the time, a lot of people actually thought it didn't come from Indonesia, because they didn't think that somebody in Indonesia would write on issues in such a daring and open ways that are issues that are considered taboo at the time. Maybe issues related to religion, to sexuality, including stories such as of women taking off their hijab, because that is a really often a controversial issue in Indonesia. They can really attract a lot of hostilities against the women. And they also think that there was a voice that was unseen before in Indonesian media. This is the surprise, was that initially, because the issues are a lot more mature, we had thought that our readers were mostly more mature, maybe 30 plus. But then we found that our readers are actually young, and they get younger by the year. So right now, the biggest chunk would be 18 to 34, with the biggest one, the bigger part, between 18 to 24 years old. And the surprising thing also is that 40%, almost 40% of our readers are male. So despite the whole pink color and everything. And though most of them still come from Jakarta and bigger cities across Indonesia, but there's, during the pandemic, when we move a lot of our activities online, our events online, we also found that a lot of our loyal readers actually come from the remote regions. I guess these are the regions where people are kind of starved for information like that. So we found that this young demographics are why they are kind of feel the pull of Magdalene, is because they're the one that's mostly affected by the constant tension between the conservative traditional upbringing and the kind of progressive ideas that they are exposed to and that they probably feel more connected with. They are also the ones who experience daily sexism, discrimination, misogyny, and even gender-based violence. So, and we find that, through our observation, through surveys and conversations with them, we find that for them, becoming a reader of Magdalene not just expose them to ideas that can help them navigate their realities, but also gives them a sense of validation, a sense of empowerment, and a sense of community with other like-minded people. So from this kind of insights, from this finding, we adjust the way we work, approach our work, our editorial content, our messaging, and the way we engage with the community. And because I guess this might be a universal thing, but because the reading and news consumption behavior has changed among the younger people, we adjust our content to be more accessible without dumbing down. So I can really relate to what Hasmin was talking about. We use popular culture for for example, to discuss challenging and taboo topics. We talk about discrimination against minority ethnicities while we talk about beauty industry. We touch on, or we cover LGBT issues and gender expression through reviews on a Korean drama or Korean pop music, which is really huge in Indonesia. So over the years, we have developed an emotive approach to our overall design of our content by using more storytelling, more illustration, and social media focused content, including videos, reels and stuff. We even go into TikTok just recently. And we do like the journalistic activities like data journalism and things like that. But we try to make it more kind of relevant to their life, to their reality. I guess this is what Hasmin was talking about. For example, this one on the left, we created a game last year. So we wanted to cover the issue of people who marry young. And getting married young is really one of those tensions that I was talking about. A lot of young women are being pushed to get married as soon as even before they finish school. And so we try to see like the experience of these women, and we put them into a game. We create a game based on different personalities. And so our audience can play this game and see how their life turned out. So those are some of the things that we do. Some reflection in the first year of the pandemic. There's a lot of changes during the pandemic, and we were really stressed out. But the good thing is that it has led us to kind of be a lot more reflective, to reimagine or tweak our brand and our approach to our journalistic work from the point of view of service. So I think this is really important when we deal with younger audience, is that we see us as not just coming from a point of view of giving you this message, but we want to hear from them. We want to listen from our audience. And this was strengthened particularly from our training, our newsroom training of constructive journalism last year with the Constructive Institute. And then also this whole reflection thing. And so we envision Magdalene as a kind of feminist sister to our readers, who not just point out problems or call out or highlight problems, but also point out to the solutions and kind of explore nuances and encourage people to engage in a conversation. And so that becomes like a thing that you can be part of the change. And so this kind of process becomes the basis of everything that we do, whether editorially or in relation to community activities. Also, the one other thing that's quite important to Magdalene is social media. I'm sure every new media knows this. We have become more discriminative on which social media platforms would be working on. Before, we were big on Twitter. We do a lot of not just promotional things, but also a lot of online activities. But then we realized that Twitter can be such a toxic verbal sewage that full of a lot of people who are bloodthirsty and just like to attack each other. And we thought this is not the kind of communication that we want or that we need, actually. I mean, it might work for certain media, certain public figures, but that is not, that's not the kind of things that to me is constructive. And it's also costing me because my staff were all very stressed out. I mean, they were burned out. I had compassionately because they couldn't stand being attacked day in and day out by people who don't like what we do, who call us feminazi or whatever. So, so we shifted our social media strategy. I mean, we still promote our stories on Twitter, but we move a lot more on Instagram. Facebook is a bit old for our readers. None of them play on Facebook anymore. What we do, we create content, not just to promote our content, our website or news stories, but we also create original content on Instagram. We amplify message. We build community, and we do community activation, and we encourage conversation to happen there. And as it so happens, Instagram is also one of the, also contributes significantly towards our revenue. So one of the things that we do in constructive journalism training last year was to create our own compass. So there's a thing called Constructive Compass. And to this compass, we add the values of listen as part of our DNA. Listen for us means that doing away with the assumption that the media know what people need and what people know or what people want. And this is manifested in how our content is planned and produced. So what we do is we often ask questions on social media channels to find issues that concern them, their perspective on certain issues and their experience to share. And we use this insight to inform and sometimes shape our editorial agenda, without like pandering to them, but this is like a way to find like what is really the big issues of the day for these people. We also run online surveys, FGDs and stuff. And I think the sense of being listened to is really important in a society where women and gender and sexual minorities are still facing so many gender-based discrimination. So many times during our, when I go on events, whether it's our events or external events or anywhere, I got the pleasure of meeting our readers, and some of them have, they told me they have been reading Magdalene since they were in high school or in university, and now they're like building a career, they have a family and whatnot. And they would credit Magdalene for helping them navigate through this, through their life and making them feel seen and heard and even empowered. And I think this is the most rewarding part of this journey, is when journalism can be an impactful force for society. So, thank you.
Thank you. Again, a bunch of questions, and I also agree a lot of themes running through it, both from the listening as well as the memeing. I guess my question to you is, you're reaching out to an audience that, like you say, is vulnerable. I wonder what kind of extra work or things that you've had to do to try and give them a sense of this is a place where you can come to, this is a place where you can be a part of a community where, yeah, we will hear you. I mean, again, you're kind of going upstream. So what are some of the challenges and specific things you've been able to do to overcome them?
I think for one, it being consistent, like having this consistent perspective. For us, it's all about inclusion, it's all about equality, it's all about empowerment. And so that's one thing. Like when people see day in and day out, like when they read Magdalene, they know what to expect. And for our enemies as well, for our haters, they know what to expect. They would even tweet something like, "Oh, this is something that Magdalene would do." So that's the kind of thing that. But the challenges are massive. The challenges are massive because we're still independent and whatnot. And also, there is this perspective that that when you are looking at something from this gendered kind of intersectional, embodied feminist kind of views, that it would kind of exclude the other parts that is not. So what we do is, like right now, we create rubrics for men, or we create content that is like for men, how men can be involved and things like that. And also the other thing was that during the pandemic, in the first few months of the pandemic, we discovered that there was a spike in gender-based violence in domestic realm. So a lot of domestic violence. And a lot of the victims couldn't do anything because there was a lockdown, they couldn't get any service. And we also realized that in Indonesia, a service for gender-based violence is not really integrated, and a lot of them actually come from community-based. So what we do is that we create this campaign and this rubrics that is focusing on gender-based violence on domestic realms, and then we create a hub that put all the information on the services, like whether it's psychosocial, whether it's legal services, so people can just go there and find. And then we also create, do a lot of education on what to do when you know somebody. So I think there's this thing that media can actually function more than just delivering message. And I think that is like how our intention becomes apparent and clear, and I guess how you can build community out of that.
Oh, thank you very much. And also, thank you, audience. You guys, you're beautiful. Thank you throughout all this. And now, Chani, take us home. Again, give yourselves a pat on the back. You guys are fantastic.
Okay, thanks, David. It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Jackie and IPI for the invitation. I'm going to talk about what does news avoiders want. That might seem a paradox because they are avoiding news. So, and we're talking about new audiences. But I believe that, and that has to do with what we've been hearing in this stage for the last almost hour. They are an underserved part of our audience, and I believe that was reflected in all of these projects. I worked 21 years at La Nación, big newspaper in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And after 5 years of being the editor-in-chief, I stepped down in 2017, and 4 years ago founded Redacción. We craft our own formula of solution journalism. We like to call it human journalism, but with a very clear impact-driven journalism. We measure what happens when we publish our stories. We are a small team. I was not sure if I was going to say what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it. Our quest and our efforts are extraordinary. Our results, not yet. We have a very particular business and impact model. We produce stories for other media. So around 1 million people every month read our stories, but most of them are outside our platform. And we're going to talk about news avoiders today. Probably you are familiar with the digital news report by the Reuters Institute. In this year edition, the main highlight of the report was the increasing number of news avoiders. We've been thinking of news avoiders from the start of Redacción, and when the same survey, this is 90,000 people around more than 35 markets, when the survey asked them, why do you avoid the news? Most people said because there are negative impact in my mood, because I don't feel there's anything I can do. So the extreme negativity of media is very present, but then there are problems. We are going to review some of the hypotheses. The thing is that there is no discrimination of age in these results, but when you talk with the people at the Reuters Institute, they assume that it's reasonable to think that 7 every 10 people under 30 years very often or often avoid the news. So let me tell you a short story, recent story. 3 weeks ago, I get into my car 7:30 a.m. with my younger son, 15 years old, my second daughter, 22 years old, and taking them to school and to university. So I turn on the radio, the news on the radio. My younger son, 15 years old, they don't talk too much, but his comment was, how old are you? 180 years old, listening news in the radio. And after a couple of minutes, my daughter, she's a designer and she studied design. She said, this is doing wrong for your mental health, no? Listening news on the radio. And I tell her, no, don't worry. I appreciate your concern, but I'm okay. 1 minute later, she says, well, I have to tell you, this is harming my mental health. And she continues. She said, I believe that this is like tobacco or cigarettes. And I believe that some years from now, when our society evolves, news will come with a signal, like saying, reading the news seriously harms you and others around you. And you know what? I don't believe this is true. I mean, but this is the sentiment, this is the feeling of lots of young people. So I have to say that this is what we have in mind when we found Reacción, no? And there are some very relevant questions that I'm not going to answer, because some of them I don't have the answer. But I believe that we as an industry, we should ask ourselves our questions. This phenomenon of news avoiding is impoverishing the public conversation. Does it reflect the lack of trust that can harm media impact? Of course, some of these are yes. My answer is yes. No, are news avoiders disconnecting from public sphere? Can news avoidance deactivate citizen participation? Is there something new we have to acknowledge regarding journalism mission in our society? And I really believe that, as we have listened in the last minutes, there are some things of our profession that are still very relevant, and there will be still very relevant in some years. For example, ground reporting. But I believe that we are not reflecting enough on the things that are changing. And of course, one of the most important things in this moment is to understand what we have to change and what we have to embrace and keep on working on. So, what does news avoiders want? And this is our experience. I told you, we are very particular in media. We have a very strong tribe in our URL, redaccion.com.ar, but we have lots of what we think are news avoiders on our Instagram account. And when we done a survey last year, for many of them, we are the only source of news. So we acknowledge that on one hand, they want their agenda. I mean, politics has always been probably the most important beat for journalism, and politics is how it is. So they are not very interested. I'm not saying we didn't have to report it. What I'm saying is, if we want to acknowledge this audience, these are the 5 topics we work on at Redacción. 95% of our content is just this, and of course, this is a lot. But there's something very interesting, I understand, in many of these topics, and that they are like, I'd like to call it like a 3-dimension topic. Why? Let's take climate crisis. There is a global conversation. In November, we will have the summit in Egypt, COP27. We sent a reporter last year to Glasgow, COP26, and it was amazing what happened in our Instagram account with this reporter sending videos from there, because they understand the global conversation is going to have a big impact in the other layers, the other dimensions. The second dimension, of course, is national or your community. I'm not sure if I didn't follow that close local journalism here in the States, but the Inflation Act, the impact of the Inflation Act some weeks ago in the lives of the young people is going to be enormous. There are dozens of stories there waiting to be told. And the third dimension is the personal dimension. I mean, in all of these issues, this is the place where our audience, young audience, feel needs, and they are worried. So we have the global conversation, the atmosphere where you, and the corporate world where you operate, but then we understand that suggesting how to separate basura, how do you call it? Trash at home, it's an important topic for this. So I believe this we should cover these topics on every layer to be relevant. They want to participate. I believe that most of us, journalism and media, we are still operate in a broadcast one-way or monologue paradigm. This is too much 20th century. We still believe that our newsrooms are a factory of news that then we distribute, and out there somebody consumes it, and that model replicates perfect the newspaper model. But one of the two or three most important revolutions of this century is participation. So, and I believe that we've heard this before, the way of how you put your audience first, or how you put it in the center. We have many models of how we let our audience participate. Very short, one of them. We tell our members, we are going to cover this story. For example, lots of immigrants are working on first aid emergency system. They're very good at it. Many Venezuelans that came to paramedics and nurses. So we want to understand why they are so good, how they are feel, and who wants to join the reporter. And we bring in like 5, 6, or 7 people into a WhatsApp group. The reporter is the moderator, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to approach this subject with these perspectives. Are you wondering any other idea?" So we start a conversation. Then I'm going to report tomorrow the head of, do you have any questions for them? I have this report, send the report if you want to read it. And so at when the moment our reporters sit down and write the story, he has, throughout that conversation, the, I would say, sense of relevance of our audience that was represented by these 5, 6, or 7 people. 2 weeks ago, we make an interview to the Education Minister of Argentina. Those were my 10 minutes, sorry. And we ask our community, do you have questions? And of course, most of questions, our reporter says, obvious, I know it, but some questions appears and they open the conversation. It's wonderful what's doing the Guardian in the homepage, take part every day, very interesting, asking questions to your audience and asking for experience, not just for opinion. That is like a very more complicated arena. But they not only want to take part, but some of them want to be part. So we have a membership program. Of course, this is probably not for everybody, but we've heard that this also acknowledge part of what other projects are doing. And this opens like a very big conversation that I hope we're going to follow up around activism and journalism. I have strong ideas about that, but afterwards. Well, this is as old as journalism, but we have so much opportunities of helping, of putting ourselves in the shoes of our audience and understanding their needs and making our journalism solve problems. Again, in these 5, for example, topics. So, I mean, that's an enormous area of opportunity to connect to these kind of audiences. And at last, they want a future. And okay, we are grown-ups, so we understand that we are under a war and a crisis and inflation, and we are in a post-pandemic area. But many times, what we are saying from our media is that we don't know if there's a future. And of course, I believe that still a quite misunderstanding around solution journalism. Thinking that it's good news or is a sort of makeup of reality. I believe that there's a strong need of being more balanced in terms of course, report the stories as you mentioned in India, or report the war stories. But I believe that societies are like people. If you receive, or you're a young child, if you receive a negative impact every time, well, your ability to solve problems will be diminished. This is quite studied by psychology and by science. So I believe that there's still, even though this is a movement, a growing movement, I believe there's a strong problem with the name, solution journalism, and quite misunderstanding around the practice. But in our case, in our experience, this constructive approach on top of the problems, we talk about the problems, it's part of the formula on how to engage to these new audiences. And thank you very much.
Thank you. As you make your way back to the seat, I'll comment. I love the tobacco warning. I was a philosophy major, and I think it was Socrates who his response would have been, medicine tastes bad but is good for you, and so maybe that's a response. I don't know. I want to ask you a quick question and then go to the audience. You kind of hinted and something about activism, and it seemed like I could see a spark in your eye even from back here. So if you want, maybe take 30 seconds, a minute to sort of.
45 seconds.
Go.
I understand the issue around it's the question around when journalism converts in activism. But I believe that is the wrong question. When we started ACCIÓN, we asked ourselves this question. Is this activism? Is this journalism? We believe that we use the journalism tools, and that's the ground, and that's the most important part. But we run a monthly campaign around a cause. We support an NGO every month, and we found that our members and part of our audience loves to feel that they are making something. And I believe that we are not completely honest with ourselves when we talk about activism, because we are activists in some causes. Of course, when we talk about press freedom, we are activists of press freedom, and that's obvious, and that's a very good thing. And on the other hand, 20 years ago, we covered climate crisis with a two-side story approach, correct? Yes, it is. No, there is no such thing as climate crisis. The kind of journalism we craft today around climate crisis, 20 years ago, was considered activism. So in some of these issues, I believe that if we are using the tools of journalism, we have to, I mean, worrying about the impact of your journalism in your audience and in the world is not activism. And that's part of the problem in many of our conversations. That was what I wanted to say.
Can I add to
There are
that?
many reactions to that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with Chani. We have learned also that we can have a very negative impact if we just keep telling the bad stories, the bad news, how the powerful are so powerful and they're so mean. And that's also, in a way, misinformation. Reality is not made up. And history has shown us that even the greatest empires have fallen. And the most horrible abusers have fallen as well, like Harvey Weinstein. So we should also cover those stories, the stories of change, stories of resistance. That's important. We need to tell those stories too.
Well, because we're really short on time, and I want to at least hand it to the audience for at least one question, if not more, because this is, and I'm sure everybody will stay here as well afterwards. You had your hand up first, and if we have time for a second one, that'd be great. Here, I'm gonna run down. That's how fast I am. I'm like Oprah. Here we go.
Hi everyone, my name is Saurabh. I work in the tech industry, and thank you very much for really insightful discussion. My question is that some of the models that you mentioned, one might think that they are meant for niche audience, maybe demographic, age, gender, political leaning, or tech literacy. But I see that many of your audience have actually permeated beyond that, like in case of 40% of audience male across the tech literacy spectrum. Could you, share a few insights as to how you were able to achieve, anyone?
Anybody can take it, but rapid responses. You want real. If anybody has something that comes to mind, but we'll be very quick.
I have two sort of philosophies or approaches. I think there was a great point that people just don't want to feel, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible. So I always say to my team that if we can make people feel one of 5 things: 1, that they learned something that they didn't know; 2, that it triggers some emotion. It can be whatever emotion. It can be despondency, hope, inspiration, anger, but it has to trigger an emotion. So information, emotion, humor, and 4th is participation. Can I do something? And if you approach content like this, you can actually, in my opinion, layer sets of audiences. So you can actually have some content which in your mind you have a TG, a target audience of somebody, and then you can in parallel create a completely different kind of audience. And there are different kinds of audiences that will dip into different sort of experiences. And so you can start with a broad sort of idea, like, you know, we are, for example, very strong on gender. We're women-owned, women-led, and women are a big part of what we do. But actually, the majority of our viewers are men. So these are always these sort of paradoxes we discover, and therefore you have to keep layering. It's like lasagna. It's like you have to keep layering.
This is my failure as a moderator. I apologize, but we are out of time. But I think it's actually really good that there are questions. I'm sure everybody here will make themselves available if you have questions, and you should, because again, I want to thank all of you for coming, presenting, giving us a little bit of your vision. And I want to comment on one more thing, which is just the common thread. Even though these are all different approaches, I heard a lot of common threads from putting the audience first and listening to, I think, being a little bit more humble and kind of reframing that relationship. So again, thank you all for bringing your perspectives and your ideas. It was fantastic.